just spoke. Thank you. So I think everybody here knows Deborah. She's been a participant for a long time, and probably most people have heard that she's been a docent at Henry Cowell and dresses up in period costume and has done a lot of research, and now her book has come out. And so it's Henry Cowell, Historic Tales of Henry Cowell Redwood State Park. So we'll hear about it today, and probably some of you may have already read it or heard her previous talks. Today, you know, we can really get down behind the scenes and not only hear about what her research showed, but, you know, some of her trials and tribulations and successes in getting the documentation and how she went about getting it published and all that kind of stuff. And there's a small group here. We can be pretty interactive, but best thing, as I said, is to put your questions in the chat, and then we'll periodically relay them to her. But we will also have time at the end. You know, we can open it up for general discussion too. So take it away, Deborah.
Okay, well, good morning, everybody. Happy to be here. Thanks for this. I'm going to do a little PowerPoint presentation. So you're going to see some of the images that I have in the book and others. I'm going to talk about what the process was like for me writing the book, Historic Tales of Henry Cowell Redwood State Park, Big Trees Grove. And I really insisted upon that being the subtitle because that's how the resort was referred to most often, though it did have actually several other variant names. But so let me get started with that, and I'm going to share my screen right now and get into that program. Okay, why is it not going to the beginning? There it is. Can everybody see the first slide? Oh, good. And here it is, Historic Tales of Henry Cowell Redwood State Park. Started out as a docent at the park in 2016. I was very excited to do that. Main reason is it was the park where my brother had lived and worked for so many years. That's why I chose it. Plus it was easier to get to from Bonnie Doon, where I live. And when I started off there, I didn't know much about the history, and I learned a lot of it from the my fellow docents. But one of the first things that inspired me was the historic postcards I'd started to see about the history, showing the train coming up to the resort, the hotel buildings, the swinging bridge, and so forth. And my thought was during docent training is I want to bring those postcards to life, find out the story behind them. And I did learn at first a lot of the history from two wonderful docents, Ken Landy and Dave Cootie, who really knew a lot about the background of the resort. And I kind of used that as my original base information and started dressing up. The reason I like to dress up is I did Civil War reenacting back in South Carolina. So I had a lot of the gear I could reuse. Plus I loved doing that. And I thought the most important thing to me was to bring the resort to life, and what better way than to dress up. And my main purpose in doing the volunteering was I wanted to find out about the resort and the early visitors. What did they see? How did they get there? What did they do when they got to the resort? So those were some of my original questions. So I would most often hang out in front of the Fremont tree. Of course, I haven't been able to do that for quite a few months now. But I look forward to that happening once again. This particular photo is from a tour I did. I only did a couple walking tours so far, but it was for my good friend who's standing there to the right of me, Robert Glass. He was my office mate up at the National Archives. And he had been going blind for many years. And when he finally retired, he became involved with a hiking group for the blind and arranged for them to come out to go on a tour with me. And that was a really exciting experience. I really enjoyed doing that with Robert. And what I was really hoping today is that I could have done this as a walking tour, but unfortunately the California state parks are not allowing that yet because of COVID. So that's why we're in the Zoom mode today. But I started my research just, to back up my docent volunteering. So I had newspapers.com as part of my Ancestry subscription, and that's where I started. And I, would in the evenings at my desk or even on my bed with a laptop, just start searching, and I got really obsessed with it. I'd sometimes stay up until the wee hours of the morning because I was excited about the things I was finding, and I started to find more places to look, and like the California Digital Newspaper Collection was very helpful. The Library of Congress chronicling America. I also found a couple of other online sites for newspapers. There's one for New York State, there's another for Utah, there's another in Colorado. So as I kept going, I just kept finding more places to check. And it got to the point where just were hundreds of articles, and I was starting to get surprised at how much information I was finding on this place. I had found out from the docent, training that the grove had been purchased in 1867 by Joseph Warren Welch and preserved, and as it would turn out, the first coastal redwoods to be preserved in that way for public recreation. But I also was starting to find out it had a bigger role in things than I realized. Now, originally, though, it was just a picnic area, and this is a wonderful picture, one of Ross's that he lent me. I really have to thank both Ross and Frank for their wonderful collections. I used a lot of their pictures in the book. This one I like especially because it kind of shows you that original, use of the grove. Joseph Warren Welch did not live in the Santa Cruz area. He lived in San Francisco, he and his family. I'm not sure how often he came down to it, but he left it open as a picnic area. It had already been a picnic site since the 1850s. And people were drawn there not only because of the grove being one of the last, remnants of old growth left in the valley because of nearby logging, but also because of the visit of John Charles Fremont in 1846 during his scientific expedition. And that drew people. I have very early accounts, even as early as the 1850s, a couple of them, of people coming to visit the grove and to picnic there. This particular image I love because on the right, you see with the flags, draped over it is the Fremont tree that we know today. Just behind is Jumbo. And then on the far left there, just behind the picnickers, is the Three Sisters. I also started to become a collector too, once I got into all this. So going on eBay and finding, images to purchase. In fact, I got another view of this picnic scene just recently, which is wonderful. Shows you another view of the picnickers and the young ladies, but also the gentleman standing at the base of the Three Sisters, which I've also seen as a postcard. I hadn't seen before the young gentleman sitting at the base of the Jumbo, though. So I've really become a big-time collector of Big Trees Grove images. But what I really wanted to learn in my book was how did it go then from being just a picnic area to being literally a world-renowned resort, the first Redwood resort that was visited by tens of thousands of people in the late 19th century. Going from that to this, this is the early hotel buildings, of course, at the Grove. I got this one at the California State Library, this wonderful image showing the original building and also the additions to it and the dining porch where that gentleman is sitting. Unfortunately, it doesn't tell me who that gentleman is. That's the frustration with some of these pictures. They're not labeled with some of the individuals in them. But that's really what started it off, wanting to know more about the resort as a docent. First things I found, of course, were the advertising, mentions in the local newspapers. And that brought to light to me how it was managed. The Welches were kind of off-site, you can say. San Francisco, they lived there. 1875, there's a big change because that's when Joseph Warren Welch dies. He leaves behind a wife, Anna, and their 5 children. And here's Anna Welch, who I realize more and more is a bigger part of the story because she's left a widow with 5 children, and she could have easily have sold this property, or she could have, worked with a logger to sell the lumber off of it. But she didn't do that. She decided to preserve the trees. And she got into the first lease agreement with John Hooper to manage it as a resort. So we really have to look to Anna as the force behind the creation of the resort. And John Hooper, as you can see there, stayed for a number of years. He was the one who built the original hotel, the dance floor that was there, cut the original, pathways, picnic tables, benches, put all that kind of thing into it, truly made it into a resort. He has followed after he leaves, though, but unfortunately, when people were managing this resort, it didn't make him a lot of money. In fact, Hooper left a bankrupt. You've got Aldrich and his son, David Aldrich, coming in the mid or early 1880s. They didn't make a lot of big changes, except maybe some improvements to the road and the water system. And then you have Joseph Ball, who is the third manager, who is the most successful. And he's the one who makes some other big changes, like adding some of those additional hotel buildings and the outdoor dining porch. So I was able to get a better view of, who managed it and what kind of changes were made, over time to the resort, which was quite helpful. And at first I thought, well, I'm only going to find things in local newspapers, Santa Cruz, the different varieties, the Sentinel, the Evening News, the Surf. But then I started finding things elsewhere. I went into Google Books and also the Hat High Trust. And on these sites, I started searching for books that might mention, or tour guides originally, so was my thought, that would mention Big Trees Grove. And I found a number of them. But something else that surprised me when I went to these sites was I found a lot of references of the Grove in convention proceedings. People in groups around the country. Oh, let's see. I'm going to cancel that right there. But they often in their conventions would stop off to see Big Trees Grove as part of their activities. So, like for instance, that one on the Hat High Trust here, the HMMBA in California. That's the Hotel Men's Mutual Benefit Association. And they had a convention, of course, actually several different times, and came to Big Trees Grove. And in their little pamphlets they prepared, you get not only a little description of what they did and how their group enjoyed the Grove, but also sometimes photographs of them there, which was really exciting. So I started to see this pattern developing that there was huge crowds that would come to the Grove. And it was being mentioned in all these travel guides and in newspapers all across the country. That's what really stunned me. And I realized that the visitation was immense. You have the railroad first coming in 1875, so it made it very easy to come to Santa Cruz, from Santa Cruz to the Big Trees. And by 1880, when people could come directly down from Oakland, you had people funneling in from the Bay Area all the time. And I was able to find a couple of mentions of visitation. 1876, 9,000 people came, and I found another mention in 1900 that 30,000 people came that year. So if you calculate things out, it ends up being probably over 500,000 people visiting the Grove in the 19th century, using those few little tidbits that I found. As I said, I became a collector not only of photographs, but also of advertising media about the Grove. A couple of examples. The one on the right is an advertisement for Cowell's Big Trees, which was the neighboring resort operated by Milo Hopkins. I'll mention a little bit more about it later, but on the left, that's that one that says Welch's Big Trees Grove. That one is really exciting because I believe that's the only list of tree names that I found produced by the Welch during the Welch era of the Grove. Dating the tree names on the list, I see that was made sometime after 1919, when the Welch family would have been managing the Grove themselves. So that was a really exciting find. It's on very cheap paper. I mean, you touch it, I'm afraid of it falling apart. So I have to treat that little piece of paper very delicately. So all this research, though, was still just for my docenting. And what I did, though, for the park is I compiled these binders of the newspaper articles that I found. I would organize them by decade and then chronologically. I have an entire shelf in the park library filled with the stuff I found. And then with the images, I also printed them out and put them in a binder, telling people, which institution they could go to get a copy of that image if they were interested in it. And I grouped them by location, In this case, that's the Fremont Group and the Big Trees Hotel, because you see pictures of all those together. So they kind of made one little grouping, as opposed to like a whole group of pictures of the Giant, or a whole group of pictures, say, of the Swinging Bridge, or what it might be, or the entrance to the Grove. But then I started to realize, because I found all these newspaper articles from all over the country, it was obviously still a very exciting thing to come to California, say if you were from Kansas or Nebraska or Alabama, and you would write to your hometown newspaper with a description of your trip to California. And so often people came to visit Big Trees Grove Resort and would describe what they saw, what they liked, the activities there, the hotel, what the food was like. So I had this incredible treasure trove, and that's what convinced me that I should do something about the history as in terms of a book. And there were other wonderful books that had come out that had mentioned it in one way or another, like Valley of the Redwoods has a really good little section about the resort. The hiking guide to Henry Cowell, that complete guide, is mostly hiking, but he does have a history section, but it's not really on the resort. It's more about the ranchos and Isaac Graham and Fremont, and people kind of in that area kind of touched upon it. The best one up to that point would have been the articles by Tracy Bliss and Randall Brown in the Split History. They did one called Two Trees for Fremont, and that had a really nice description of the resort. But I thought, well, those are articles, but there's no single book that tells this whole story, and that's what convinced me to check in the website for Arcadia Publishing. And my first thought, of course, was like many of the local wonderful picture books that were done, like the San Lorenzo Valley of Lisa's, and then the Roaring Camp book. That was my first thought. But then I realized quite quickly, looking at their website, that in 2014, they had acquired the History Press. It was a British press. And they have now started producing these wonderful kind of short histories, combining text and pictures. And I actually thought I wasn't going to have enough pictures to do one of the original kind of Arcadia books anyway. And I also thought that I needed to tell more of the story of this unique site and its kind of role in the Redwood tourism history. So I chose that branch, and I put in a proposal through the History Press, and found out that I could do a book that was, the limit would be between 42 and 47,000 words and up to 80 images. And that sounded just right for what I was hoping to do with this history. So I put it in. That proposal ended up being about 30 pages long. The most tedious part of it was trying to compile all the media contacts, which is a required part of it. But describing what your book is going to be about, who you think your audience is going to be, and all of that was all new to me. So I just tried the best I could, and they said, "Oh, that sounds like a good idea." The very first chapter, I didn't start at the beginning. I started in the middle because I had a lot of really good newspaper clippings about the visit of Andrew Carnegie, the steel magnate. So I actually started first with that chapter. But the way I primarily organized it is that I had already, and when I found every one of these articles for the park, not only did I print out the article, but I also at home transcribed every single article I found. So I'd already done all of that. And what I did is I took a lot of the best quotes out of a lot of these articles, and I just arranged them kind of, by a subject kind of area chronologically. And that's kind of what my book was. It was literally a binder filled with all these quotes to begin with. And then from that, I just kind of filled out the rest of it and kind of wrote all around it. But the Carnegie chapter was the first one. That wonderful picture of the Carnegie luncheon is from the Santa Cruz Public Library. But the thing that's frustrating is I find these other wonderful images in the newspaper clippings, but unfortunately, I don't know where the original photographs are. Like this wonderful one showing Carnegie and his wife and daughter sitting at the luncheon, a beautiful close-up. I've searched for like the San Francisco Call, archives, but there is some, but it doesn't go back this far to this date. So where these earlier San Francisco Call images are, I would love to know, because there's several that I've seen that I would just love to find the originals of. So if anybody has any advice on that, please let me know. Another thing that was really helpful for me was the portfolio of Edward Vischer, the artist. because of some of the narrative he had with his portfolio, gave some really interesting clues about the grove. He came to Big Trees Grove in 1862 to do a drawing of what then was known as Fremont's tree. We know today as the giant, because that was the one that Fremont back in 1846 apparently measured for Isaac Graham, the man who claimed to own Rancho Zayante. Now, what's interesting is there's also this wonderful image of the giant from the Jake Paul Getty Museum. And I like this image because it shows you the top of the tree. Can you see the tops of both trees? The one on the left, the drawing, it looks pretty perfect. But on the right, the photograph from the 1880s, it looks a little bit messier on top. And there's always been these stories I keep coming across that the giant lost up to 25 feet or maybe up to 60 feet of its height in a storm. You see that all the time, but there's no exact date for when that happened, or there's conflicting dates. But I think these two images at least give us a ballpark, because I think that that image on the left from 1862 shows a really perfect tree, and that Watkins photograph on the right shows a little bit scragglier looking one, maybe. Also, the one on the right is great because on the far right of that, you see the dance floor that John Hooper built. And you see the fences, and also how clear the land is around the giant, because of course, as a resort, they wanted to, you know, cut down all the little sprouts and other what they would consider weeds to keep it nice and clear for the public, because people were picnicking there and touring and walking about, and they didn't want to have to go through all that. So in a lot of these early pictures, it's a very open, very barren, ground. What's really interesting is that just now, the park ranger I talked to said that they're kind of thinking about doing a little bit more clearing of the debris around some of the trees for the fire danger it has. So there's that controversy between, keeping it natural, down trees now versus maybe we want to remove some of that because of the fire danger. And I told him, well, I can give you lots of pictures historically of what the grove looked like. So maybe you can justify doing some of that clearing because you are restoring the historic look of the grove from this period if you clear out some of that fallen debris. Frank, I love this picture that you let me use, because this really shows better than I think any other how close the resort buildings were to the Fremont tree. And also it's a beautiful image of the big opening on it. And of course, why we have two Fremont trees, of course, the original Fremont tree was the giant. The story developed sometime, we think in the 1860s, that Fremont, when he had visited here, slept in the hollow of the tree. Well, of course, the giant has no hollow, so that story kind of migrated over to this big hollow tree. And this is another case where the Edward Vischer accounts really helped me, the artist, because he describes this tree in 1862 as having this, large burnt out hollow. It had no name at that time, but he does say that the only source of light was from the entrance. So we can take from that there was no window cut before 1862 into that tree. I have multiple accounts saying that there was at least 2, maybe even 3 windows cut into the Fremont tree. It's hard to know because we only see today the remnant of one that has grown over. The others, if they grew over, if they existed, we just can't tell anymore. So that was a real key thing to know, is from that Vischer account of this tree, that the only source of light in 1862 was from that opening. And of course, I wanted to cover the very earlier period of this, just as a kind of a background story to the resort. And of course, to do that, you have to talk about the Zayant people, because they literally managed the land for thousands of years. So when the first Europeans come into this area, they are seeing a managed landscape. And so that's really important to understand as part of the story. I got this wonderful drawing from Mark Helkema, the state park archaeologist. He had used it already in the Split History book, and he allowed me to use it in mine as well. And the wonderful thing is I was pretty well into looking for images when I went to go visit the wonderful Big Trees exhibit that Lisa had up at the San Lorenzo Valley Museum. And as I was looking through there, I saw on the wall this wonderful map of the ranchos, and asked her immediately, can I please have that for my book? Because it really, sets the landscape. she was kind enough to add the location of Fremont's tree and the big trees on it for the book. So that was a really great help. Just accidentally just seeing it going, that is fabulous. Other things worked and some things didn't work. Ken, one of our docents, had this wonderful image of the dining porch that showed this whole group of people. Unfortunately, when I wanted to use it for the book, it wasn't a high enough resolution. But fortunately, Ross did have this cropped image that was of the same view. So I had to use that one, which was wonderful, even though I'd rather have been able to use the much larger one that showed more of the porch. Unfortunately, it just wasn't going to work for the book. Now, in this picture, I did have one person identified because of a newspaper clipping I found at the local public library in their clippings file. The lady in the center, she'd be the third person over from the right, was identified as Annie Ball. She would have been the wife of the resort owner, Joseph Ball. Now, I assume that gentleman in the picture is Joseph Ball, but I don't know for sure because it didn't mention it in the newspaper clipping. But anyway, this is one of my favorite images of the resort, showing you what the picnics were like for people when they came and the large groups that they dealt with. I don't know if anybody has any questions at this point, just feel free to ask. The other thing I wanted to talk about though with the book was how did people get to the Grove, to the resort? What routes did they take? And so that was important to me. Of course, originally it would have been by horse and carriage, coming up, what is now Highway 9, crossing behind where the toll house is to be able to cross the San Lorenzo River to ford it. Later, that's where the swinging bridge would have been built, just down from river from the Giant. So you would have come from that approach, walking in by the Giant and then coming into the Grove. Once the railroad is built, you have people coming in, not at this site. This is actually the second location for the railroad. This is right behind Hopkins' establishment at Cowell's Big Trees. The original stop for the railroad would have been back behind the Welch property. But they were not very well liked by the railroad. So when Hopkins put his establishment up, the railroad stop was moved down to right behind his building. That would have been in 1902. But originally, when you came into the Grove, you would have come directly to the Fremont group, where the Fremont tree, the Jumbo, and the Three Sisters and the little hotel building were located. And of course, I wanted to have images, any images I could get of people visiting. And I was really fortunate. Ross, again, you had a wonderful image of the swinging bridge. I went to UC Santa Cruz and found some wonderful images. I love this one of people walking along the San Lorenzo River, making that little crossing. The one in the upper left corner I found on eBay, and that's a group of people coming from Mount Hermon, from the Christian resort or retreat. And they used that in the book, but they didn't use the part that had the forward march to the big trees. So I was a little disappointed that they cropped it off at that point. But I got the message across that it was groups coming, whatever way they could get there. And big groups like this. This is only a part of the picture. It only shows you a small section of this big visiting group. And this is from the Glass family. They are descendants of Joseph Ball, the third manager. I was put in touch with them through Sean Conley with the Genealogical Society. So he was very helpful in helping me contact some of the locals who had a family connection. I love this picture not only because it has the large group of children in it, but also has one of the few people of color in an image that I found. The lady on the far left, to me anyway, appears to be Chinese. I assumed that she was a nanny or perhaps a servant to one of the families. So that's a rare case because, of course, most people during this period that visited the Grove would have been, white families, probably middle to class to upper middle class folks coming to visit. But I do have some accounts of Chinese visitors coming down probably in the 20s and 30s. I have one example I mentioned in the book about them coming to Cowell's Big Trees. I recently found some information that, and I hope I'm pronouncing it right, maybe you can tell me, Julia, the Kumantang they were like the political group in China, and I guess advocating for democracy, if I'm remembering that right. I'm not sure. They came annually, apparently, for picnics at Big Trees Grove through the 20s and 30s. I've seen a couple of mentions just very briefly about that, but I have yet to find any pictures, which I would really love to find. And there were big groups. Now, this wasn't the biggest. This is probably the second biggest. The biggest group picnic was probably the Southern Pacific one, but this would be next in line. It was the 1908 visit of the Great White Fleet. The sailors from that around the world excursion for the U.S. Navy made Santa Cruz one of the 20 ports of call. And the sailors were quite anxious to get away from the sea and get up here into the big trees, apparently. So there's some wonderful descriptions of their visit that I used for some of the newspaper accounts. Again, newspaper pictures I would love to find the originals of, with them sitting here, for their luncheon. Again, it's a San Francisco call photograph. I just would love to be able to find it someday. But thankfully, folks like Tracy Bliss had some images that helped me. She had this wonderful image of the sailor posing at the Fremont tree, which I also used in the book. But above all other images, my absolute favorite that I found was at UC Santa Cruz. This is also the 1908 Great White Fleet visit. This panoramic picture is probably about 36 or 40 inches wide. It's just incredible. It shows the over 1,500 people that came to visit, probably closer to 2,000, I would think. The sailors, the ladies in their beautiful white dresses, all standing in front of, you can see the Fremont tree on the right, the Three Sisters on the left. Just a spectacular image in beautiful condition at UC Santa Cruz. And here's a close-up of one half of that incredible panoramic. By the way, I'd love to have the park, and I've already talked with them briefly before the pandemic about reproducing this panoramic picture and putting it in the visitor center. I would love that. So we'll see what happens. But this is just an incredible image. And you can understand why, even though I originally thought of having the iconic Fremont and his family in front of the Fremont tree picture on the cover, instead, the history press decided to use this image. And I'm glad that they did, because I think it came out really well. It really showed you how popular the resort was during its heyday. Another thing about the cover, I was really, really pleased with the way they did the cover, and it was their idea to use the Henry Cowell signature. I thought that was brilliant. I selected a number of pictures for the cover, but the original one that they showed me had another black and white picture where you see the jumbo image. And I didn't think that was very good because it was out of balance. Plus, I wanted to show the really beautiful reddish orange color of the redwood bark. So I chose the jumbo shot to add to the cover. That's the only big change I made to it. Of course, you had to go through looking at proofs of the images. The one on the left is one that they proved everything on. The one on the right, they had problems with. So I had to fight for some of these images. You can see the two, like the number 10 and 26, the one of the ladies and gentlemen in the river that got that from Ross. And I love that one because the only one that showed people at the entrance. And it went so well with a quote that I had in the book about people, young ladies, bathing with their ankles exposed in the river. So that was just a picture I had to have, even though it was not the best quality. They did accept it. And they had a problem with the one, number 26 of the YMCA tree, because they said they couldn't read everything on the little banner. And I said, well, that's not the important part. The important part is to see the main part of the banner and the people standing there at the tree. So they said, okay, that's fine. And then the one I showed you earlier, that big crowd, I used that, but that was the original color of it, that weird orange color. So once we changed the color, the tint of it, they were fine with it. The other ones, unfortunately, didn't make the cut, and I had to find replacements for. So that was an interesting experience. I think I only had about a half dozen or so, maybe rejected, of the images I submitted. Now, this image was also used in the Redwood split history, the Museum of Art and History's journal article that Tracy and Randall did. And I love this image because I knew I had to use it because it showed you the original hotel building all by itself, the one that John Hooper built. But what was really interesting, these are from the Romanzo E. Wood collection at Chico State, which happens to be my alma mater. And so I went online to look at this image and, see how I could order it. And I came across a couple other images, and I've mentioned this before to you. When I saw this picture of these gentlemen standing in front of the giant, covered as it was often at that time with these, personal calling cards, it just struck me the ages of the people. And the gentleman on the right looks so proud, with his hand on his jacket there. And the young man in the middle, I thought, well, maybe could be about 18 years old. I mean, and the man on the far end, he could be 16. And that young boy sitting in front looks about 10. And I realized when this was taken in 1875, that would have been the ages of the Welch children, his sons. So I felt very possible that this could be the Welch family and the only known picture of most of them. And I got really excited about that, but I had no proof. There was another picture with this, another one of these two ladies with a couple of other gentlemen in uniform standing in front of the Fremont tree. Oh, excuse me, the giant. They're in front of the giant. And I thought, well, maybe that could be Annie Welch, in the white hat. And is that other lady in the bonnet, is that Isabella, the daughter? So I wasn't sure because it didn't say, but thanks to Ken Landy, one of the docents at the park, he had a picture of Joseph Warren Welch Jr., the eldest son, as an older man. And when I compared that to that picture, who I think, was also Joseph Jr., I'm convinced it's the same person. So this is my best educated guess, but I do believe I have the picture of the Welch family here. And Joseph Warren Welch on the right-hand side. He would have died, as I said, in 1875. So this would have been the only picture, at least I know of him. I have started doing more research on the family itself. I found very little so far about them, but when I was doing the book, but after the book, I found a little bit more. And it turns out they're all buried at Cypress Lawn up in Colma. So I think I'm going to have to make a pilgrimage at some point. This picture, a couple of pictures, are really wonderful because it shows you the location of the dance floor compared to the giant, and also where the bandstand was, which would have been among this little group of trees known as the Nine Muses. And where are these pictures? I found them at just looking online at night. The top one from Brigham Young University, the bottom one from the Denver Public Library. Again, pictures of people who came to visit from all over the country. And there's pictures of their visit at the Grove end up in the repository back where they lived, probably. So just wonderful images to come across. Of course, the most iconic images, the one I originally wanted to have for the cover, but we did put it on the back cover, is Fremont and his wife and daughter standing at the entrance of the Fremont tree. That image of them standing hand in hand to show the size of the giant is a very iconic image as well. But the image at the University of Southern California, the original of that image, is just magnificent, very clear. So clear, I'm able to zoom right in on the face of Fremont and his wife. That was exciting to find. And when I did find it on the USC website, I was a little disappointed at first because they had named it the Grizzly Giant. And their caption for it was completely wrong. And so I sent an email and told them what it should be and who these people were. And I was stunned that same night I sent the email, they responded to me and said, thank you, we're changing it, and you can have this picture for free. So I was really excited about that. But this was also a wonderful discovery for me at UC Santa Cruz at the Special Collections. This image of the Fremont visit in 1888. I had never seen this at the park before. It's wonderful, showing all the guests, and I'm not sure who everybody is. I need to try to track that down eventually, but you can see holding the flowers is Mrs. Fremont. You've got her husband right next to him, and then on the other side, in the other hat, little bonnet, is his daughter, Elizabeth. So this was a real find for me, seeing another view of that very important 1888 visit of the Fremont family. This is one of my also very happy discoveries. in Colorado, in History, Colorado. It's a wonderful image that gives you a view of the dance floor, the Three Sisters, Jumbo, and the Fremont tree, and the buildings. So it really gives you an idea of what people first saw when they came off that train and entered into the Grove. And it really blows up quite well too, in great detail. But it was one of the hardest images I had to get. I don't know why. It was just very difficult dealing with History, Colorado and trying to obtain an image. It took me weeks and weeks and weeks, and it was very confusing. So this was the hardest one of all to get, and one of the last ones that I was able to secure. I found this wonderful drawing in this Santa Cruz County Resources book, and it's the closest thing I have to the interior of the tree. That's my, golden idol to find, is actually showing an interior of the Fremont tree when it was furnished with a bed and a wood stove, but I've never come across it. But this one came close, at least this little bench with these two little girls sitting on it. And I thought, oh my God, will I ever come across a picture that shows me this? And lo and behold, at UC Santa Cruz, I did. I found the picture that little drawing is based upon, and I was super thrilled. So this just adorable picture is the closest I've ever come to seeing the furnished Fremont tree. And trees, that's a big part of it. Tree names in particular. I did this little layout showing you all the different kinds of signs there were on the trees. One thing I really wanted for my book was a tree list, and I was able to do that. I was really thrilled that the two appendices that I chose to do did not work against my word count. So that was really happy for me to hear. I found the names of 100 trees by the time the book was published. I'm now at just over 120. So I keep coming across them. And this picture I came across in a little booklet about the International Sunday School Convention. They had a tree named, in fact, it was the same as the YMCA tree. They renamed the same tree. And this is the only shot I have of one of those dedications, which is really cool. I'd love to come across again the original, but what I have out of the magazine is not too bad. And you might notice that some of the images here, like the US Pacific Fleet, the Junior Order of United American Mechanics, and the E. Clemenhorst plaques, those are all bronze plaques that are in the collection of the park. They have a few others, I think maybe a total of about 6 or 7 that were found in the park. So that was another way I found out about tree names, was I had the opportunity to go, Mark Hilkema let me into the museum collection storage, and I was able to photograph all of these plaques. As I said, the appendices that I used were my tree name list, but also I had permission from Tracy Bliss and Randall Brown to include their list of silent movies filmed at the big trees. And I was really excited I could do that, and very thankful to them that they let me reprint that. But one of my horrors during the process when I got my proofs back is that I looked at the list of the silent movies, and the last 2 movies were left off the list because somehow I sent them a list that left off the last 2 movies. And I almost had a panic attack. So I had to rush to make sure that they added the last 2 movies back on to make sure the list was complete. So Tracy, I'm so thankful that happened, that we were able to fix it. My tree name list, I didn't want to make it too complicated. So I basically just, gave the name. I had a lot of cross references because some trees had multiple names. And I would say, the origin of the name, if it was known, the date it was dedicated, or if I didn't have a date of dedication, then the earliest known media mention of the name. I have another list I made specially for the park docents that gives that citation. I didn't think that was important enough to have, for the general public, but for the park staff, they will be able to go and look at that citation and know, when that name was given. So I was really excited about that. I also made a little asterisk to mark which trees on the list are also on the Redwood Loop Trail map that I included in the book. One of the other chapters in the book I really enjoyed doing, and I felt was really important to do, was the Redwoods versus the giant sequoia, because there's simultaneous things happening. The resorts up in the Sierras, both at Calaveras Grove and the Mariposa Grove in Yosemite are happening at the same time as the Big Trees Grove here, in Felton. And there's a lot of similarities. The trees are being named, in the same kind of way. The visitors are coming, for the same, purposes. They're astonished by the stories of the people who are, the trees are named after, the measurements of the trees and so forth. But what's really important with this part of it is the visitation. Even though the giant sequoia were popularized first as far as resorts, they, were discovered later. And then of course the coast redwoods had been known for so many years before, 100 years almost. But it's the transportation route to get to them. To get to Mariposa Grove, you'd have to get on a stagecoach. After getting all the way across the valley, Central Valley, to get to the foothills of the Sierras, you'd have to take a stage, maybe 50 miles or more to get to them. And they're not available to be visited all year long because of the snow. Well, on the other hand, Big Trees Grove is very easily accessible all year round, because of the wonderful climate we have. And that's why so many more visitors came here. And it had a much higher visitation by far, by tens of thousands more than Mariposa Grove during this period. So it was rather interesting to kind of discover that. Another section I wrote about, of course, President Theodore Roosevelt's visit. And that was really interesting because I found different accounts that gave kind of a different light to things in the book. But what I really loved is there was a booklet about his speeches that was printed in the 19th century, and it included a couple of photographs, including this one on the upper left, showing him actually giving the speech. I would love, again, to find the original, but at least I have this version from the booklet. And what's also interesting from the accounts is that when he's giving a speech, we're most of us familiar with the fact that he criticized the people of Santa Cruz for the display of the visiting cards on the trees and the signs on the trees. He felt that that was vandalism. Well, it literally says in one of the accounts that he's looking to his right at this, card-covered tree. And that tree is the one you see there, what is now known as the Fallen Sister. When it was still standing as part of the Three Sisters, it was the one covered with cards that Roosevelt was looking at when he started into his comments about the vandalism. And also, it was the site of the original outdoor bar, or the outdoor bar that Joseph Ball built for picnickers. And you see those folks standing behind. And of course, you can't talk about Henry Cowell Redwoods without talking about our namesake a little bit, and I did in the book. Unfortunately, most of what I found was pretty negative about him. I know he was a very successful entrepreneur, but the one line that really stands out to me was the quote from an article about him, that he had a dollar mark for a soul. And that seemed absolutely true, because of his concern was more for making money. I don't think he ever saw a tree that he didn't think he could make some money off of. Picture up there, the lime kilns, his IXL Lime Company up in Fall Creek. His cutting of the trees next to Big Trees Grove on his property, which was adjacent right there near the stream and just beyond it, beyond the San Lorenzo River. That's something you have to really take into account, because when visitors are coming to the Grove at the turn of the century, you think, oh, well, they're coming, they have this quiet, nice experience. But in reality, at that same time, Cowell is cutting the trees on his property about 200 yards away. So as these people are touring the Grove, they're hearing the cutting of the trees, they're feeling the earthquakes as the trees fall. And so that really put into perspective to me how much of a contrast it was for people when they arrived, especially at that time period. They would come across that swinging bridge, they'd go through this devastated area of logging, and they'd come into this beautiful, pristine grove that the Welches had preserved. And I think that, especially after 1900, really had a lot to do with people's feelings about the Redwoods and what was happening to them, and because they were seeing this stark contrast there at the Grove. And I think it really played into the fact of Big Trees Grove being not only the first place where people got to know about the Redwoods and to fall in love with them, but it also set up this incredible contrast that a lot of people just kind of sunk into their minds and their hearts about the loss and the little bit that we had left. Cowell's Big Trees, it was known as I said, but It was Cowell who leased the land, but the man who really made it into a resort was Milo Hopkins. And I have to thank the family, the descendants of the Stewart family of Milo Hopkins. They provided me that wonderful picture of Milo with his grandson, Stanley. He was the one, Milo Hopkins, who built the clubhouse that would have been closer to the river. In fact, if you're walking outside the Redwood Loop Trail, like you're going over to the river, to the pipeline trail, just before you get there, you see a big barren spot on the ground near the railroad tracks. And I always let people know that is where the clubhouse once stood. Now, one thing I really hope to do as a result of this project is to encourage the park to be able to put at least one, maybe two, if I'm lucky, exhibit panels out to the sites where the historic hotels had once been. The first would be, of course, at the site of the Welch Resort. And ideally, I would love to have another one out here where the clubhouse once stood. So that's something I'm going to really be pursuing because it's really important spots there. The clubhouse is just wonderful. I love the fact you see the advertisement on the roof. Ross, your wonderful displays were used once again in Scotts Valley when I did a little project there out with Jay Topping, and they were just a real hit. They always are a real hit. So I want to be used again and again once I can do more public events. But anyway, Milo was just, he had originally started hauling people up by stagecoach, involved in the city stables. He had he had an agreement apparently with the Southern Pacific to bring people up to the Grove. But in 1902, he decided to lease that land from Henry Cowell and set up his own resort. And he ran it until about 28, and then he let his son George and grandson Stanley start to operate it, and they did so until about early World War II. Another part of the story in the book, of course, a big part of it, 1899, that is when the Great Fire above Los Gatos took place, that really kind of was the catalyst for the Redwood preservation movement. The article that was written about it in Wide World magazine by Professor Holder was inspired by Josephine Clifford McCracken, and she also was instrumental apparently in getting that magazine to hire Andrew P. Hill to take the photographs, some of which he turned into artwork, like the vision of the fire right there when it came to Mira Vista Winery. But the big story, of course, is when he wanted to include in the article pictures of living giant redwoods. And of course, where else would you take pictures of them except at Big Trees Grove, the famous resort? And he went there one day on the train and got off, set up his camera. The famous story that he started to take pictures, but he is confronted by a resort personnel, and he is kicked out very ungraciously out of the Grove. Well, to this day, we don't know who that individual was. There's controversy over it. I know Lisa believes it might have been Joseph Ball, who was the manager. I tend to think it was Stanley Welch, one of the sons, because Stanley had a really bad track record of bad behavior in that way. Let's put it mildly. We'll never know for sure, but the result we do know, and that is that it inspired Josephine Clifford McCracken to write her editorial in March of 1900. Really blasting the owners of Big Trees Grove for how they treated Andrew P. Hill, but also it was her call to the public that there should be a public park of the Redwoods. And that entire movement would eventually result in Big Basin Redwood State Park. And just the sadness that we had this year about losing a lot of that park, the historic portion, a lot of it being damaged. But of course, it's going to recover. And it's going to be an interesting process to watch. And in a way, it's kind of the process we've been seeing over the last 150 years at Big Trees Grove, because the last big fire that came through there was 1867, just over 150 years ago. So I like to bring that up to people, and I will when I get to be back on the trail, that this is a story of regeneration that's happening now at Big Basin. The other aspect of this is that because Big Basin is closed for the foreseeable future, it's going to cause a huge influx of visitors to Henry Cowell. So I just ask, if you're local, if you're going to go, please go during the week. I know that they're overwhelmed already, and we know we're only in April, right? So I'm hoping I can get back there on the trails to help out. Unfortunately, they really want us just to do kind of crowd control right now. And so there's going to be very little opportunity for interpretation, at least for the foreseeable future. But it is going to be really overwhelmed. Already, Henry Cowell gets 1.8 million visitors a year. Big Basin would get over 2 million. So you can see it's going to be a big crunch this season. I'm hoping in some little way that maybe my book being available will help people understand the park a little bit better, because they're not going to be getting that, in-person interpretation like they would expect to get coming, at least not right now. And of course, the end of the resort era, I go into that, how the buildings were left, kind of abandoned once this became a county park. And over on the other side with the Milo Hopkins, that property, World War II, it stopped operating at a resort and just was kind of left abandoned. I know that these buildings were taken down in 1958 when they got damaged by some of the fallen bay trees. The state parks didn't want to expend the time or energy or money to rebuild them, unfortunately, at that time. So we have nothing left of them. I don't know when the ones on Cowell's big trees were taken down, though I do have a picture showing them with a fence around them in 1959. I found that up in the collections of the California State Parks. It's one of the few images they had that actually helped me in my research. When I went up to their Sacramento office, they had very little. So maybe someday I'll will them all my, Big Trees Grove collection, and they can actually have something in their archives about it. But I talk a little bit about it, but the story of it becoming a county park and in 1930 and a state park in 1954, that's a story for another researcher, another author to tell. And I think it's going to be Tracy Bliss, because her family was so intimately involved in it, and that's going to be great. My, purpose was to talk about the resort era, the proprietors and the visitors, especially, and what their experience was. And I hope I did a good job of that. So one of the last things, of course, I had to do with this was create the bibliography, do the endnotes. I really enjoyed that, actually. The index was a little tricky because they have a special program to use, and I tried really hard. And I think I did a pretty good job with it. But those were some of the last parts of it. My last big headache I had before the book came out was this. I just assumed, never assume, that they were going to have my map as a full page. But when I saw the first proofs, they had it as a half page and you couldn't read a thing on it. So another heart attack moment. So I said, no, it has to be the whole page. So thankfully they were good about it and did it, because otherwise it would have been totally useless. I based it on the 1932 brochure when it was a county park. I had the help of one of the rangers, Stephen Elmore, doing kind of the technical part for me, so I could at least put some of the named trees. I didn't want to put too many. I didn't want to put any that were not on an already public path, because I didn't want to encourage any off, trail stuff. But at least I wanted to give people a sense of where the resort was and, what kind of, layout it was for people to see and enjoy. But that was my biggest heart attack of the whole process, is when they only had it on a half page when I first saw it in the proofs. But it all led to having a book out on the shelves in the bookstores, and that was the big thing, thankfully. But I'm still continuing doing my research, and I have a website, or excuse me, a blog, I guess you would call it, where I'm adding more stories that I keep finding, and I'm still finding stuff all the time, and images and new ones that I come across, I'm putting up there. So I encourage anyone, to keep learning about the history of Big Trees Grove to check out the blog. And I guess that's kind of the end of my presentation.
Wow. Unbelievable amount of work you did there, and are still doing. That's great. Thanks.
Yeah, it comes from being an obsessive person. Yeah.
One of the very first things that you said was that you wanted to make sure Big Trees Grove got in the title. And so it sounded like whoever you worked with, they were pretty cooperative.
Yeah, they were very cooperative. I was really surprised. Plus, I went over my word count limit, and they didn't have any problem with it. I think I went over by over 1,000 or more words, and the fact that they let me have the appendices that didn't, work against the word count was really helpful. And They were great with the pictures. The only frustration was a few of the pictures that they didn't think were going to work, and that you know, I was able to remedy that. So all in all, it was a pretty easy experience. I mean, they give a lot of good, you know, how-to little manuals about things. And so coming from absolutely no knowledge of how to do this at all, it helped. I have to say, I would have had probably a very different experience if I hadn't had the already 3 years of gathering information just for my volunteering. It would have been much harder to do it straight off. And so thank goodness I did all that ahead of time, and got to the point where I felt I had enough that, you know, I could make something of it. So that made a big difference.
I think Tracy, when she gave her presentation, said that she worked pretty closely with one person. You kind of used the generic they, but were you pretty much
yeah, this
working?
one person, yeah,
And
I
you
can't
had,
remember her last name was Krill, Miss Krill. She
and
was my editor directly. And then once I finished working with her, now all this time afterwards for publicity, I have a different person I'm working with. But you know, so it's only really been two main people.
so you had good rapport with her.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, she said she would check with, you know, other staff there about images or this or that. So that's why I say they. But she was the main person I communicated with all the time, was just one person. So
Right.
yeah, I thought, I mean, it's like I can't believe I did it, but at the same time, they did make it very easy, and were very helpful along the way.
And so the photos you gave, what you showed the proof page. So
Yeah.
you gave, how did you do that? You had originals, and then did they make proofs from them, or you had to do that? And then when there were problems, you know, when you showed that page on the right with some of the problems, it sounded like they explained what the problem was, and sometime it could be corrected or not.
Yeah, it was a little back and forth. They had me submit a little, you know, memory stick with all the images on it, you know, high
Oh, they
quality.
were
So
already, so you gave them already scanned images.
yeah, I already scanned them all, and I sent to what the specifications they wanted. I sent it back to them, and they sent me the proofs, you know, page by page. And they sent me proofs that were like, these are all ones that are accepted. They had several pages of those. And then they had several pages of, these are ones with problems. And like I said, I could work some of them out. I begged for some of them. And the very important thing too, those images of who I believe are the Welch family, they were very poor condition. I actually paid a photographer in Chico to rephotograph them and kind of redo them, clear them up, because there was a terrible glare because of some kind of material the photographer had painted over, some kind of glaze. And so I paid about $100 to have that done. And I thank the photographer in my book. But so when I submitted those, they were already redone. And I said, those are critical images. And so they accepted them. So I did have to make that one change.
Did they do any?
I did it myself before I sent it to them. I knew it would not be acceptable. So I paid to get that done and send it to them.
I think you did allude at once. Did they help try to clean up images? Do they have that capability too, or they leave that to you, or just tell you?
I think they made some alterations, like the coloring of that one that was orangish, and it changed it. I think they made a few minor changes from my memory, I guess. Yeah.
Just kind of as a little bit aside, and we should think about talking about this some more sometime. You had mentioned, you know, about the Welch and the comparison of the photos. I believe, well, I think I heard a presentation, but I'll have to find it again. You know, where there were programs, I think the person used Google even, that can give you a percentage estimate of whether two photos represent the same person, and even over different periods of time. I tried it first with two photos of my grandfather who I knew were the same, and I got back something like 53% probability. So I'm not sure how good these are, and there may be programs that, you know, are more sophisticated that cost money, but apparently, you know, this bit about photo, well, lots are going on with photos, as you probably heard, including, you know, MyHeritage just came out with colorization and now animation. You can give them a photo and they'll have the person moving around. But the whole idea of being able to find different pictures that you're not sure of who they are, I guess as long as you have one reference, apparently it's getting easier to do. And I don't know much about this other than to know that the people are working on this and there are things out there. So if anyone else knows, or if you hear about that, it may be interesting. My research on Carmelita Cottages, I have a couple different pictures of the woman Lottie Sly, and then a couple that might be her, but I don't know. And I'd love to be able to use some kind of technology, to get a better approximation. So anyway, it's an interesting subject that apparently, is maturing, and we should be able to have, in the near future, be able to answer questions, are these the same people?
Yeah, I don't know if the pictures I have would work too well, because one is just a copy from a newspaper, so it's not that clear, and the other it was enhanced already from being a really bad photo. So I was it was a stretch, and I am making an educated guess on that, but I thought it was really worthwhile to do it.
So Deborah, we have a couple of questions in the chat.
Okay.
So one from Frank Perry. Was the fallen sister the same as the card case tree?
No, the calling card case tree is actually outside the Redwood Loop. It's right on the edge of that barren spot near the railroad tracks where the clubhouse stood. So the official calling card case tree is there. That's the one you can walk right up to, and you can still see the thumbtacks and even scraps of paper on the inside of it tacked on it.
I think I've got photos of it actually with the close-ups of the thumbtacks. Yeah.
And I think that sometimes the term calling card tree might have been applied to other trees, or address tree is another term. So many of the trees, I was really amazed, were just covered with cards, a lot of them, not just the calling card tree, though that's the most famous. But I was really happy to realize that it was the fallen sister that was the one that Roosevelt was looking directly at.
So we have another question from Debbie Muth. She says, what was your experience working with the History Press post-production? Were they helpful with publicity and sales? Have they been prompt with royalty accounting and payment? And also, did you have a budget for buying photographs? I know that can get expensive.
Oh, yes, very important thing I almost forgot to mention. Oh, it's terrible of me. The reason I'm splitting my proceeds of the book with the Mountain Parks Foundation is that they helped me fund some of the photographs. I think they gave me about $300 altogether. So I also wanted to contribute to the park. So I am splitting the proceeds with them. And so I didn't have to have any out of pocket myself for buying photographs. And the History Press has been really great. Post-production, I'm in contact almost every week with the lady I deal with now, as I've been telling her about, different events and programs and magazines or whatever it might be. And they're very prompt. They're going to produce for me, because I decided I needed a little postcard of my book. And they're going to be sending those to me soon, because I figured at the park itself, they're going to have a table out in front of the visitor center. And they're only letting a certain number of people in the visitor center. Plus the fact that the bookstore is a separate building. I want to have those postcards available at the table in front of the visitor center for people to advertise my book. And that way they'll know that they could go over to the bookstore if they wanted to get it. So they're going to send me a bunch of those. They've been good about little posters and handouts and things like that. And very encouraging. And I did finally get my first royalty payment. As far as I know right now, up until just before last Christmas, that's only up to last Christmas, like maybe up to the 20th, I sold 276 books. So I'm hoping that will increase, because, with everything opening up again and into the spring and into the summer. So yeah, they've been very helpful and continue to be. I think they realized too that the pandemic was a real burden for people getting their books out that came right at that moment. So they've been helpful all this whole past year.
So I have another question here from Juliana. She just wonders about the history of the Chinese redwoods. I know there are 2 in the park.
Oh yeah. Well, I don't know a lot of detail. I know it's in about 1940, they're rediscovered in China. I don't know for sure. I'd have to check with the other docents of when the 2 trees were planted at the park. One of them is quite large, and I think it's because it's got a better location right next to the fee booth, where we also have a giant sequoia growing. That Dawn Redwood is doing quite well. The smaller Dawn Redwood, which I think was planted at the same time, whenever that was, I'm not sure, but it is right at the very end of the Redwood Loop Trail, right across basically from the visitor center. It's got a little fence around it, and it's not very big, and I think it's because it's just not getting enough sunlight where it's located. So depending on you know, you think about the size of the one that's out by the fee booth, maybe it's been there for 50 or 60 years, I'm guessing.
So there's another comment here, and it was from Jay Topping, and it was one of the images that you put up. I just want to make sure that you get to see what he wrote. He says that last image of the group with Fremont, I saw Elu Anthony on the left.
Oh, okay. No, I mean, definitely. I think I might see if I can put that up on my blog. That's one of the UC Santa Cruz images, and maybe put a call out to whoever can identify the people on it. That would be really great. Maybe on researchers. Huh?
Can I just say, I took a screenshot of that photo and I would like to study it
Oh, sure.
against photos that I have and see if I can find some other, I'm sure it was local dignitaries probably that were with Fremont at that time. So.
And there were two gentlemen mentioned. Well, actually, I think a lot of the people were mentioned. Let me go back to the articles about that day, and I can give you the names, because they do mention some of the names of the people. So that way I'll try to remember to send that to you.
Great.
And we can do like a little matching, like when you were a kid, you know, match that name to that person. That'd be great. Thank you.
Juliana said, you know, we were talking about the photo identification. She said the FBI could help do that stuff.
There you go.
She had also asked about the date when Mount Herman started, and then you showed the people walking. Was there some kind of coordination about from Mount Herman to go there, or from other places about groups, or was it just kind of haphazard, or do you know? Or?
I don't know yet. I probably should contact Mount Herman. I haven't yet, and see if they have information on what their groups may have done in the past like that. I do know from a lot of the newspaper articles, the camps that kind of sprung up seasonally that had different, you know, interesting names right there, you know, near where Felton Grove is, and right around Felton, and even around Boulder Creek. There were a lot of camps where people would come down and be for like a month or two. The women and children would stay in them. The men would come down on weekends. It was very famous for those kind of camps. There's a lot of reports of those groups coming into the Grove for dances or just a tour. So no, it's a good question. I should check with Mount Herman. I hadn't yet.
There's a Mount Herman train stop.
Okay, yeah, right.
So I don't know whether they were using that ground before they have Mount Herman up the hill.
Yeah, I just don't know enough about their history. Obviously, it would make sense. I mean, big groups like that coming, and this is a major attraction, you know, people coming down to see it. I have mentions of people staying at various hotels, you know, Pacific Ocean House downtown, and, you know, various places that people would come from the hotels. They probably had organized groups, I guess. I don't know.
But do you know when they have Mount Herman though?
I don't know. Judging from that
Later,
picture,
right?
that looks like about 1910, judging from the ladies' outfits, I think.
1910.
Yeah, this is what it looks like to me.
Deborah, you're almost right on. I think Mount Herman was
started
in around 1908, 1909.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, the earthquake, I think.
Okay.
It was.
I have heard story. They were looking for a well. They tried to dig the well, and then the earthquake came, and then something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe around. Okay.
You can see.
Well, I worked up there for 8 years.
Oh, okay. Yeah, if
I know they have foreign groups and come all the way. And
do you know who up there might be really interested in their history, who would be a good contact to talk
Deborah,
to?
I have it.
Oh,
yeah,
I sent you a note. Yeah,
Okay.
so I'll get you the gentleman's phone number and email.
Yeah, oh, that'd be great.
it's all volunteer, I know.
Yeah,
There's also a
Yeah.
lady that works there in the history center too.
Eddie.
I have the contact.
yeah. Yeah, I didn't get to go to every place I wanted to. I mean, I even did not make it to the Bancroft. I mean, so there's still a lot of things that are probably still out there.
Mount
But-
Hermon has a fire, have a safe.
Mhm. Well, they could have things. Like I
I
said,
have
I'm
never-
amazed. I'm still coming across stuff. I mean, it's,
Lots of
And-
stuff.
and I don't know how many of you listened to my story on the radio the other week. I came
No,
across
I
this
didn't.
amazing, scandalous story associated with Big Trees Grove. Did any of you guys hear the radio program? I don't- But I'll tell you real quick. It's if we have time, I don't know if we have time, but
Yeah.
it's Stanley was married to a lady named Lila, and Lila had a niece, Eleanor Mann, who would come down to visit them quite often. And Eleanor got married to a very high society guy who was involved with a family who manufactured blue jeans, who apparently was like a competitor with Levi Strauss. And so her wedding in like 1919 was a really big society event. But 5 months later, they're separated, and they are the center of a huge, very contentious divorce case. And there's all kinds of things thrown back and forth. But one of the scandalous things is the husband claimed the wife had a nude photograph taken of her. And it turned out it was taken at Big Trees Grove. And it was not really nude. It was taken by her aunt, Lila, the wife of Stanley, when she was 16 years old. At that time, when the pictures of nymphs and, forest nymphs were very popular, it was one of those pictures, apparently. So my hunt right now is to find the court case of that, and hope to God that I can find that photograph in that court case. So all kinds of things I'm coming across I didn't expect to see. So that Big Trees Grove was at the heart of a scandal of San Francisco high society. So that was kind of cool.
Deb, in terms of the photos, what's very interesting, I thought, in your talk is, a lot of times you write, we do the research, in the books and the newspapers, and then we try to find photos, to illustrate some of the things, and you seem to really get into the photos, and the photos, in looking and studying the photos, kind of helped tell the history. I mean, you found things in the photos that then, brought part of the history alive. And I thought that was very interesting. But can you talk a little more about how you found some of these photos? I mean, we're going to hear next month, UCSC, of course, just put their collection online. And I forgot how much previously, their catalog was online, but even so, if you catalog photos and you say photo of this and that, it doesn't necessarily tell the whole story. But are these places, these other archives like History Colorado and some of the other ones, do they have their stuff online? Did you just Google it, or did you have to?
Just Googling online and came across it. I mean, I didn't know to look at these institutions. I just looked for pictures of Big Trees Grove, and when I spotted something that looked like it could be it, and I zeroed in, I found it was at that particular institution. And speaking of UC Santa Cruz, what's interesting is I went there, of course, in person to look through the images that were supposedly under the finding aid, right, listed as that locale. But once they put things online, there were other photographs I saw online that I didn't see when I went there in person, because they weren't identified correctly.
Right.
And one of them in particular is what I believe is the back side of the Fremont tree, showing the window when it was open before it had closed up. And that was listed under, it's really funny because on the back side of the tree, they had an advertisement for a hotel in San Francisco. So the description of the tree is the name of that hotel in San Francisco, but that was only an advertisement. So I did, once I saw them online, I wrote to them a big long list of corrections to make on some of the pictures I saw, but I also saw pictures there that I didn't see in person. So this goes to show you.
Deborah, I have a question about the statement you made regarding the Fremont tree, and that the only light came from the opening, because
Right.
back at the turn of the early 1900s, late 1800s, early 1900s, the Wonder Tree also had an opening into it, which has since grown over. Can you be sure that it's not referring to that opening? Because you used to be able to get inside that tree.
I never heard that about the Wonder Tree. I've walked actually up in it because they allow us to do that as docents. I've been up in there and I've never heard that
Okay,
it had an opening.
I
And
haven't.
it's so far away from the public area that I don't think it would have been. I
Hmm.
mean, but then again, that's early. That's before it was, you know, a resort. I don't know. I just trusted his account because he's an artist, and the eye of an artist would be very, I think, reliable
Right.
in his description. So that's why I believe that.
Right.
But no, if you have an account of the Wonder Tree, I'd love to see it because I never heard anything about it.
Yeah, I have that account. And the other thing I want, you know, there was the guy who, and I can't remember his name now. Did you cover the different people that I can think of 2 or 3 people who lived in the Fremont Tree for very short periods of time? Is
Right.
that?
I did mention a couple of them. You know, Moses Meters is one of them, and the
yeah,
other gentleman, I can't remember his name at the moment. It's probably in my book. The hunter.
The deer hunter, yeah.
Yeah, and those are the 2 I mentioned. And that's the thing. I mean, I did the best I could of what, you know, time I had too, because there's a lot of things I found later that I wish I could have put in the book that I found with my later research, you know. And so if I ever get a chance to redo it, I'll put some of these other things in.
Volume 2.
Some of these wonderful descriptions. And also I'm sure there's going to be corrections because I'm like, you know, I did the best with what I could find, and I'm sure there's still problems with it. That's one thing I was hoping to correct, and I'm sure I'll be corrected too. But some of the docents would tell certain stories and very different things. And like a lot of people were saying how Joseph Warren Welch charged a fee, and I had to explain there was no fee until you get to like, you know, 1891. And so it was just wide open until then. So I was hoping with the book to help solve some of those issues about varying stories, but I know that I'll probably have to be corrected on some of them too.
So Deborah, that's a really good question because, you know, my experience with Arcadia, and of course History Press is owned by Arcadia now, is that Arcadia will not even contemplate doing any corrections at all. So was there anything in your contract with History Press that allows for corrections?
I honestly would have to look back. I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah. So I don't know how it's going to work. You know, how I'd have to look back at the contract. I've just been dealing with so much else again, you know, how long it is, and, you know, there can be another version of it in the future. So I'm not certain.
Lisa, I believe Ross had a question. He's been holding his hand up.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I looked it up in my Mount Hermon album, and they were founded in 1906.
Oh, okay.
There was a question, you alluded to this, and there's a partial answer already, but about the difference between Cowells and big trees and, you know, the Welches, et cetera, big trees. But if you want to answer that a little also, not just the difference, but, you know, conflict or cooperation.
Yeah,
or
there's a lot of conflict.
What about someone at the time, you know, like, would they know the difference if someone, you know, is in Santa Cruz or San Francisco, I want to take the train to Big Trees, would there be confusion about that, or how did that?
I think people from outside the area didn't really realize the difference at all. The thing is that, okay, the Welches, they built their big fence around their property, and it even got bigger once Milo started his operation. And there was a great deal of animosity between, especially Stanley Welch and Milo Hopkins. And I blame most of it on Stanley's behavior. So Milo did not charge an entrance fee. He made his money by selling postcards, you know, souvenirs, lunches, and whatnot. The Welches, you know, had their entrance fee, right? So there's that difference. Also, that the property that Milo Hopkins built on had already been logged by Cowell a couple years before. So it had very few big trees left on it. And that was the frustration with the Welches, because here's Milo Hopkins having people come to his establishment claiming he has the big trees, yet they could sit on his porch for free and look at the Welches tree. So that's why the fence went up. And that's why the fence got bigger. And then I had this wonderful little excerpt I found in a newspaper back east of, you know, the conflict, saying that, well, once the Welch fence went up, then Milo built a platform so people could get up on the platform and look over the fence to see the trees. And then there's literally violent incidents between Stanley and Milo that included, axes and guns and, fist fights. And so there's all kinds of, in that first, 10 years or so after Milo started in 1902, actually almost 20 years, there's repeated confrontations between him and Stanley.
Wow.
So
So
they're
Deborah-
really fighting for the tourist dollar, really.
So Deborah, I mean, I'm on the Welsh's side here, because Milo Hopkins did some not nice things too. I mean,
Oh.
he moved the train station.
That's true.
He with his Southern Pacific contacts, and then people getting off the train station because they built they couldn't get into the Big Trees Grove. So they were as bad as each other.
Yeah, they were. I think Stanley was worse, but Milo, he instigated some of these incidents by coming over with visitors to the Grove, to the Welch's property, even cutting down the gate one time with an axe. That's what Milo did. So no, he's not innocent. But I have a lot of other episodes of Stanley being, just not a very nice person. but yeah, no, they were both to blame. That's for sure.
Wow.
Deborah, I have one question. I don't know if you touched on it and I missed it, but there's still that controversy whether Fremont actually camped in the tree. And
Oh, yeah.
his statement later on was, well, it makes for a good story, so let it stand.
Yeah, I don't think he ever did. I think he was in the vicinity, obviously, because he measured the giant. He was there, but
Didn't they camp on Thompson's flat up on the top? As my understanding?
you have that account too. But then also Fremont does mention, during that 1888 visit that he was camping nearby, so very close by, like right there. So it's hard to say. I'm sure he was in both places at various times. So I'm not a real Fremont expert. That's really Ken. He's kind of that. But I don't even know if Fremont ever saw the hollow tree. Maybe he did. If he did, he didn't take notice enough of it to write about it.
And
Well, the story is that his days at Thompson's Flat, he didn't write about too much because they were partying pretty.
Oh,
him
okay,
and the Graham and all the boys.
possibly.
It poured with rain, if I remember. It was a really rainy. I remember him writing about the rain.
Well, that's another reason for not being in that tree. I mean, it's changed over time, but it's not a very comfortable place in the rain. So, though I have heard that it didn't used to flood as badly as it does now since they've redone the area in front of it. It floods much worse now than it used to.
Was it Carolyn Dahl wrote in My First Holiday the story that Richard Kirby told to her about the fact that it used to be the case before they graded the Grove, that you could actually ride a horse into the Fremont opening, which is a huge difference.
Yeah, and I came across another account like that too, somebody mentioning that, or at least it being mentioned to them. So it's possible. Like I said, they have definitely redone that ground in front, so it could have been much bigger. Yeah, there's controversy because of the location. How many windows were there? I have one account that I mentioned of a lady visiting saying she saw a glass pane in the window, and another account saying that the window was large enough for a 10-year-old boy to pass through it. So and many accounts that say 2 and even 3 windows, even though there's no evidence of more than one right now where it had been.
There's that one famous postcard of a woman sitting on a platform looking over the trees. Have you any idea what that's referring to?
I don't know for sure, but I think that might be the platform that Milo built, but I'm not sure.
Oh, that's interesting.
That's what I'm assuming, since I have a mention of him building a platform. I don't think it's the bandstand, because the bandstand's much lower, and that's over in the Nine Muses, which is right next to the Three Sisters. So I think it's a platform that was on the other resort. It's just a guess. That was the biggest frustration, with so little information about the Welches and some of these early things that happened there, and it's still a frustration. I'm hoping to search. I've got some feelers out for some more information on the Welch family. I just find it so hard to believe that the family that owned this place, especially even during Anna's lifetime, she died in 1905, and by that time she already had 2 presidents come to visit her grove, that there's not some kind of correspondence between her and somebody else talking about this place. I just, it's got to be out there somewhere. I just can't imagine that they didn't talk about it to other people. And I'm hoping someday I'll come across that, correspondence somewhere.
Oh,
I'm hoping to find it maybe through other family members, distant relatives or something.
I had one other question, Deborah, and I mentioned it in one of the chats, I think, but the one photo where you said the gentleman's wife was in like under that porched area with the canvas.
Oh yeah,
And-
Anna Ball.
In it, there was a gentleman standing against the doorway that you thought might be her husband.
Yeah,
Then you have that early photograph in your presentation of the man sitting on the porch.
yeah.
To me, they look similar. I don't know if that's something you've looked at.
Yeah, I like I said, all I can do is guess that it might be him. I also have another photograph through the Glass family that shows, because he was the proprietor of the Central Hotel in Felton. And he's supposed to be one of the people on the porch, but I don't know which one he is. It doesn't say. It identifies his daughter on that picture, but it doesn't identify him. So if there's any other pictures of the Central Hotel there in Felton that would identify him in it, I would love to see that. So that's a little bit of a frustration. Yeah. That I have no pictures of any of those managers that I know of. I do know one of them at least is buried in the Felton Cemetery. One of the, not the managers, but one of the guides. Harley Kelly, I think was his name. I came across that. So I'm kind of curious who else is in do you have a list of who's at the Felton Cemetery?
yes.
Lisa?
Yes, I do.
Okay, well, I'd like maybe take a look at that sometime.
Okay.
See if
Yeah.
I recognize anyone else and maybe know where his gravesite is. He was listed as one of the guides. And I found like 4 names of 4 guides, 5 actually. And one of them who was Harry Staley was a manager in 1920 to 1930 for the Welches. And then once it became a county park, he became a guide. And then he died a little bit later, maybe another 20 years later or 10 years later. I'd love to find out more about him because he's actually the 4th manager that I know of. Okay.
Any other questions, comments? I see a couple people join later. Thank you for showing up. Nice to see you. All
Okay.
right.
All right.
Well, that
We used up the time, I guess.
yeah,
So,
well, it's just fantastic. A lot of people have done these kind of books that you've done, have come nowhere near to, what you've uncovered in the research you did.
well, it was just, that's the weird thing is that none of this could have happened without newspapers being online, because I would not have known to look at these newspapers around the country and how would I get access to them. So that was the thing that was kind of amazing to me. And that most of it I could just do from sitting, on my bed at night and just search for this stuff. It's just amazing what we can access now.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And
I gotta say too that Deborah, you also are a person that gets out and about. When I first started seeing you around doing my research, I saw you one time at the MA, and I just met you before that once, and then I kept seeing you at different gatherings and things, and I thought, well, I guess she really is researching something important here. But you just, you got that drive and that dogged attention to just keep going after what you're looking for. And I think that's also been why you've been so successful with your book.
Oh, well, thanks. I call it obsession, but that's the way to look at it. Well, also that's from being retired too. So you got to find something to occupy your time.
Man, what would that be like?
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks again.
Right.
And just a reminder, it kind of almost segues a little bit. Next month, we're going to have the librarian from UCSC talk about their digitization process. And I'll be in contact with her. But I'm going to mention some of the things that came up today about photos. And maybe she can give a little more insight into some of these things about, you know, how you could identify people from one photo another, and where, you know, some of these photos might be, and, you know, other kind of questions that kind of, you know, evolve from your research today and what you mentioned today about, you know, trying to obtain photos and then figuring out, you know, who's in them, and then getting good enough quality ones. I don't know, you know, we could ask about how they're scanning, if they're just scanning them, or they're trying to enhance them and all that kind of stuff. But I think it could be really interesting. And, you know, you've had all this experience both with finding the photos and then getting them in the book. So if you think of any more, you know, questions, I think we could try to, you know, prod a little bit next time. It's make it kind of interesting. So
Yeah, and make sure you ask her, you know, because they were very nice to UC Santa Cruz with accepting the corrections that I sent them, and we're pleased to get them. So I think that they're really interested in, you know, people who can help, like, you know, researchers, letting them know what's wrong with the caption they might have or the identification they might have.
yeah.
So,
Well, okay, well, hopefully you'll be here next time and everyone else will join us,
okay,
and we'll say goodbye.
right, thanks again.
Thank you.